The first sound was not the crack of the whip, but the hush of 200 soldiers holding their breath, waiting for leather to kiss flesh. Then came the sharp report, slicing through dawn's stillness, and Thomas Brennan's back arched as if lightning had struck him. Blood welled in crimson threads, soaking into the earth that had already drunk too much of men's suffering. Yet his jaw clenched hard around the leather strap, and not a single cry escaped. Silence became his defiance, each unbroken breath a vow that pain could not master him. They had assembled the entire garrison, a theatre of discipline where one man's body was spectacle and warning. But none could know what stirred beneath Thomas's silence, that 3 nights before he had seen a girl cornered in the shadows, her dark eyes wide with terror, her hands clutching the small satchel of beadwork she had come to trade. Sergeant Murphy's laughter, thick with whiskey and cruelty, still rang in his ears, and the memory of his fists breaking that laughter would forever burn brighter than any lash that fell now. Ayana's name was not shouted here, yet it pulsed in his veins, the secret heartbeat of every reason he endured. The lashes fell in relentless rhythm, the post groaning under the strain, Thomas's uniform torn into ribbons that clung to his bleeding back. The soldiers shifted uneasily, some biting their lips, some staring at the horizon to escape the sight. Colonel Harrison stood rigid, his face carved into command, but even his eyes flickered each time the whip landed. None of them saw what Thomas held inside. The vision of Ayana kneeling in the dirt after the fight, pressing torn cloth to his wounds with hands that trembled yet did not falter. Her whisper in Lakota had been soft as prayer, unintelligible to his ears, yet perfectly clear to his heart. Gratitude. Sorrow. A thread of healing that had woven itself into him when he needed it most. Now that memory wrapped around him like armor. Each lash carved fire, but he bit down harder, tasting blood and leather, refusing to give voice to the pain. In the corner of his mind he saw again the carved bird she had pressed into his palm as they dragged him away, its smooth surface warm from her touch. It was hidden now in his cell, but the thought of it lay against his skin like a heartbeat. Every strike of the whip became a toll paid willingly, an offering for the girl whose eyes had already changed his world. The 21st lash tore through old wounds, and his knees threatened to buckle. Darkness wavered at the edges of his vision, but he forced himself upright, refusing collapse. To fall would mean surrender. To endure meant honor. He thought not of rank, not of duty, but of Ayana's face. The soldiers around him, men hardened by drills and battles, could not understand that it was not discipline that held him upright. It was love, pure, unspoken, yet fierce enough to eclipse agony. Blood streamed in rivulets, pooling beneath him, but he felt only the warmth of her presence in memory, the way her eyes had seen not a soldier, not an enemy, but a man. That recognition had changed him. For years he had marched beneath flags, obeyed orders that carved men into weapons, but never before had he felt whole. Until the moment she looked at him with a mixture of fear and trust, and something inside him shifted forever. The whip cracked again, yet he held on. He held for her, for the small chance that his suffering might mean something beyond punishment. Somewhere beyond the gates, she might be wondering if he yet lived. Somewhere, her hands might be working bead by bead, creating beauty in defiance of cruelty. And here, tied to this post, he carried her prayers inside him like fire. The crowd stirred, a ripple of unease breaking through military formation. For beyond the sound of leather and blood, another sound rose, the distant thunder of hooves carrying with it a new fate. The whip froze mid-air, and the compound turned toward the gates. Through the haze of agony, Thomas lifted his head, his vision blurred, but his heart suddenly racing. Something was coming, not more lashes, not another command, something greater, something that would change the course of his life, perhaps even the fate of both their worlds. And as the sun broke over the horizon, painting the sky in gold, Thomas felt hope surge through his broken body, fragile yet unyielding. He did not know what would enter those gates, but he knew this. Ayana's eyes had already marked him, and her memory was stronger than chains, stronger than whips, stronger than death itself. If this moment stirs warmth within you, if you feel the quiet healing of love rising even in the midst of cruelty, let that light linger. Share your thoughts, leave a comment, and subscribe to carry this story further, because love, once chosen, deserves to be remembered, and every voice that honors it keeps its flame alive. The whip cracked through the heavy morning air like thunder splitting the sky, and every strike carved another burning river across Thomas's back, yet not once did his lips part to cry out. The leather strap between his teeth tasted of iron and salt, but he held it firmly, because to give in would mean letting them win, not over his body, but over his soul. Soldiers stood in rigid lines, their eyes locked forward, though many flinched with each lash, unable to bear the sound of flesh tearing, yet unwilling to move against the order. And through the haze of pain, Thomas thought only of the moment 3 nights earlier when Ayana's frightened eyes had found his in the darkness, the way her trembling hands had clung to his sleeve for a heartbeat before he had stepped between her and the cruelty of men who carried hatred in their laughter. That memory was his anchor, the silent vow that if he had to endure 30 lashes, then so be it, because she was worth every mark carved into his skin. Blood trickled in thin streams down his back, soaking into the dust beneath the post, staining the earth with sacrifice. The garrison watched, forced to stand as witnesses, as if discipline was a spectacle to be performed rather than justice to be served. Yet, amid the rhythm of brutality, something shifted in the air, a silent weight pressing upon everyone present. Colonel Harrison stood stiff as stone, his jaw tight, his eyes betraying the faintest flicker of unease, but his command was unyielding. And Thomas, his body shaking, clung not to pride but to purpose. He remembered Ayana kneeling beside him after the fight, tearing a strip from her own dress to staunch the blood at his brow. Her whispered words in Lakota had been foreign to his ears, yet carried warmth that healed deeper wounds than any knife could close. It was that whisper, those hands, that gift of a small carved bird pressed secretly into his palm, that gave him strength now when the world wanted to break him apart. Each lash blurred into the next, until pain itself became almost a rhythm, a strange heartbeat of endurance that carried him from one breath to the next. He drifted between consciousness and darkness, the edges of his vision trembling, yet he refused to collapse. Somewhere in that haze, he thought of the girl's quiet bravery, the way she had faced a world that saw her as nothing but savage, and how she had still chosen kindness. Her courage was the fire that burned inside him now, a healing fire that stitched his soul even as his flesh was torn. The men around him could not understand it. To them, it was madness to take punishment for a stranger, folly to strike a superior officer, and ruin to risk everything for a fleeting moment of compassion. But Thomas knew better. In that instant when Ayana had been cornered, his choice had never been madness. It had been love, pure and unspoken, the kind of love that seizes a man before he even knows its name. The whip fell again, the 21st lash splitting open old wounds, and a ripple of discomfort ran through the line of soldiers. Some swallowed hard, others shifted their boots against the packed dirt, as though the weight of silence was heavier than the punishment itself. The post shuddered under the force of each blow, the wood groaning as if it shared in the agony. Thomas bit harder into the leather, tasting blood on his tongue, and forced himself to remain standing, though his knees quivered. He had promised himself silently that he would not fall before her father, before her people, before anyone who might believe that compassion was weakness. He would endure, and in enduring, he would prove that honor was not just a word shouted by officers, but something a man carried in his heart, even when it was carved open by pain. Through the blur of his lashes, he thought he saw her face in memory again. Eyes dark as river stones, wide with fear and yet filled with strength. Lips whispering prayers, hands trembling yet steady when they touched him. She had given him something no uniform, no rank, no nation could ever grant, an understanding that his life was not measured by obedience, but by the choices he made when no one else dared act. That realization was his healing, even as wounds burned across his back. Each stroke of the whip was a reminder of what he had gained, a truth deeper than orders, a connection stronger than chains, a love that had been born in fire and pain. And when the next lash fell, and the next after that, Thomas did not think of the colonel or the soldiers or the sentence written in ink. He thought only of Ayana, somewhere beyond these walls, perhaps wondering if he still lived, perhaps fearing that his courage would be punished into silence. He clung to the carved bird she had left him, the memory of its smooth surface warm in his palm, and he let that memory hold him upright when his body longed to fall. Blood stained the earth, but hope bloomed stubbornly in his chest, and it was that fragile, impossible hope that carried him from one breath to the next. If this moment stirs something gentle yet powerful in your heart, if you feel the healing warmth of love that endures even when the world turns cruel, then let this story stay with you. And if it touches you the way Ayana's courage touched Thomas, remember to share your thoughts, leave a comment, and subscribe for more, because sometimes the stories that heal us are the ones we carry forward together, keeping alive the belief that love can rise even from the harshest trials, and that even in the darkest moments, compassion remains the most radiant light. The 24th lash never landed. The leather froze mid-air, halted by the sudden sound of hooves thundering beyond the gates. The compound stirred, a wave of unease rippling through the lines of soldiers as heads turned toward the sound. Dust lifted like a veil in the rising sun, and through it rode 3 figures, their silhouettes stark against the light. They entered not with war cries or drawn weapons, but with the quiet dignity of men who needed no noise to command respect. The one in the center sat tall in the saddle, his long hair streaked with silver, his war shirt adorned with claws and quills that caught the light like fragments of memory. His face bore the marks of years, lines carved by wind, by sorrow, by endless struggle. But his eyes were sharp, obsidian stones that saw everything. This was Chief Iron Bear, Ayana's father, a man whispered of even in the barracks as one whose presence could shift the balance of a battlefield without lifting a weapon. The garrison held its breath. Muskets twitched in anxious hands, sabers rattled faintly at soldiers' sides, but no one moved without Colonel Harrison's command. The colonel himself stepped forward, his boots striking the ground with measured finality, his face carefully composed, though unease flickered behind his eyes. Two worlds collided in that silent standoff, the rigid rows of blue-coated soldiers and the quiet stillness of three Lakota riders who had walked into the heart of enemy territory, armed only with their courage. Iron Bear's gaze swept across the compound, taking in the post stained red with Thomas's blood, the soldiers standing like statues, and finally, the man bound and trembling yet still unbroken. For a long moment the world seemed to pause. The wind stilled, the sun hung suspended, and all that existed was the measured steps of Iron Bear as he dismounted. Each movement carried weight, as though every gesture was a language of its own. He walked forward with deliberate calm, each stride declaring that he feared nothing here, not the rifles, not the colonel, not even the eyes of 200 men who would gladly have shot him if ordered. When he stopped, he was close enough that Thomas could see the weathered lines of his face, the power carved into every angle of his jaw, the strength of a man who had seen countless winters, yet carried them with pride. The colonel and the chief faced each other, silence stretching taut as a bowstring. At last, Iron Bear spoke, his English steady, careful, like stones laid one by one across a river. "My daughter told me of the soldier who stood for her against his own people." His voice carried over the compound, deep and resonant, as if the earth itself lent him power. "She told me of his courage, and of the price he paid." His gaze returned to Thomas, softening for the briefest instant, as though in that battered figure he recognized something rare. The words struck Thomas harder than the whip ever could. Through the haze of pain, warmth spread through his chest, a healing fire that soothed wounds deeper than flesh. Ayana had spoken of him to her father. She had not let his sacrifice vanish into silence. She had carried his name, his courage, his wounds back to her family and given them meaning. For a soldier punished as a traitor, that truth was salvation. Colonel Harrison's jaw tightened. 30 lashes for striking a superior officer, he said stiffly, clinging to military law as though it might shield him from the depth of this moment. Nothing personal. Military justice? Justice, Iron Bear repeated, the word heavy on his tongue. He let it hang in the air, tasting its bitterness. A Lakota girl defended, a soldier punished. This is an interesting justice. The tension sharpened. Rifles twitched toward readiness. But then the chief lifted his hand, palm open in peace. 6 lashes remain. I ask that you wait. Give me this day to think on what I have seen here. The colonel hesitated. Authority pressed against conscience inside him, yet even he could not ignore the gravity in the chief's bearing. After a breath that felt stretched into eternity, he gave a curt nod. Until morning. The compound exhaled. But for Thomas, the world narrowed to the figure of Iron Bear now standing before him. The chief's eyes bore into his soul, measuring, weighing, searching for truth. He stepped closer, his voice low, meant only for Thomas. "My daughter sees your heart. She says your eyes hold no hatred. Your hands protect instead of harm. She asks about the man who chose pain over silence." His words carried healing like a blessing, pressing warmth into wounds the whip had left raw. Thomas's lips cracked with blood, but he forced a whisper. "Tell her. Every lash. Worth it. She's worth everything." For a heartbeat, the stern face softened, the faintest glimmer of approval flashing like sunlight through storm clouds. Then Iron Bear turned back toward the colonel, his voice rising again, strong and sure. "My daughter tells me this man stood for her honor at the cost of his own body. She tells me he chose justice over safety. These are not the actions of an enemy. These are the actions of a man whose heart walks in light." The words rippled through the air, heavier than commands, stronger than weapons. Soldiers shifted uneasily, sensing something beyond their understanding unfolding. Thomas, swaying in his bonds, felt himself lifted by a force greater than pain. In the presence of this chief, in the shadow of Ayana's love, his suffering was no longer meaningless punishment. It was transformed into proof, into testimony, into a bridge between two worlds that had known only fire and steel. The scene shimmered with a strange sacredness. Iron Bear's voice, the colonel's silence, the soldier's stillness, everything felt suspended in fragile balance. Yet in that moment, hope flickered like dawn breaking after endless night. Not just for Thomas and Ayana, but for something larger, something that carried the possibility of healing wounds deeper than scars on flesh. And as the chief's eyes lingered on him, Thomas felt the shift within himself. He was no longer merely a soldier punished for defiance. He had become a symbol, however fragile, of love daring to exist where hate had ruled. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of that realization cradle him like gentle hands, and when he opened them again, the world was brighter, softer, filled with a promise that whispered of healing yet to come. Iron Bear's silence stretched long enough to make the air tremble with expectation. The soldiers, still rigid in formation, looked as though they were holding their very breath, and even the horses shifted restlessly as if they too could sense something momentous stirring. The chief reached slowly into a pouch at his belt, his movements deliberate, reverent. From it he drew a bundle wrapped in soft doeskin, tied with sinew, decorated with tiny shells that chimed in the breeze. He held it close to his chest for a heartbeat, as though gathering the weight of generations into his palms, then began to unwrap it with the dignity of a man revealing something sacred. The object that emerged made the garrison gasp. Carved from red stone, polished by centuries of hands, adorned with designs that flowed like water across its surface. It was a ceremonial pipe, a symbol of peace and binding vows older than any treaty inked by pen and paper. Iron Bear cradled it as though it were the beating heart of his people, then lifted his gaze, letting his voice carry to every ear present. "This pipe has sealed treaties, ended wars, blessed the unions of our families. Today I offer to smoke it with the soldier who defended my daughter. Today I offer to make him kin." The words struck the compound like lightning. Every soldier stiffened, their faces a mix of shock and confusion, while Colonel Harrison's composure cracked, his eyes flashing with alarm. The implication was unmistakable. The chief was not merely expressing gratitude. He was offering a bond, marriage, family, peace, that no Lakota had ever extended to a white soldier. Thomas swayed against the post, his body nearly broken, yet his heart surged with an intensity stronger than the pain. Marriage. The word burned through the haze of blood and fire, searing his thoughts with images of Ayana's dark eyes, her trembling hands, her whispered prayers. He had dreamed of her in fevered fragments during his punishment, and now her father was offering her to him as though fate itself had conspired to transform pain into love. Iron Bear stepped closer, his voice lowering into something intimate, yet carrying enough to be heard by all. In my people's way, when a man risks everything to protect what is precious, the family owes him more than thanks. My daughter dreams of eyes without hatred, hands that protect, a heart that chooses suffering over silence. She dreams of you, Thomas Brennan. At the sound of his name, Thomas's breath caught. He had never spoken it to Ayana, never given her anything but a moment of fierce protection. Yet somehow she had carried it to her father, whispered it in the quiet of their camp, remembered him not as a stranger, but as a man she had chosen in her heart. Tears blurred his vision, not from agony, but from the overwhelming tenderness of being seen. Colonel Harrison's voice cut through the silence, taut with conflict. Chief Iron Bear, what you suggest is impossible, against regulations, against policy, against law. His words rang hollow even to himself, brittle against the warmth flowing through the compound. Iron Bear turned, his gaze steady, unyielding. I do not ask for your law. I ask only that you do not forbid what love has already begun. The choice is theirs, my daughters, and the young soldiers. His hand brushed the pipe as though it pulsed with life. Let them choose their fate. Thomas's chest tightened. Fate, choice, love. Words that had always seemed distant, abstract, now pressed upon him with the force of inevitability. He thought of the carved bird Ayana had given him, now strung with beads of blue and white, each stitch a prayer whispered in secret. He thought of her eyes searching his, even as soldiers dragged him away. He thought of how, in 3 minutes of violence, she had seen something in him no one else had ever noticed. The colonel's face hardened, but doubt shadowed his eyes. He had seen 30 lashes fall upon a man who had acted not for rebellion, not for ambition, but for a girl others had deemed unworthy of protection. Could he, in good conscience, deny the sacred bond being offered? The weight of command pressed heavy, yet even he felt the healing warmth of possibility, the fragile thread of peace weaving itself before his eyes. The soldiers murmured softly, confusion mingling with awe. Many had never seen such courage from their enemy, nor such reverence offered to one of their own. The air shimmered with tension, but beneath it all, a quiet truth whispered. Love was rewriting the script of hatred. Thomas closed his eyes, gathering what strength remained. Every scar across his back throbbed, but none of it mattered now. What mattered was the choice before him, the chance to step into a world he had never dared imagine. He opened his eyes again, meeting Iron Bear's gaze, and though his voice was raw, nearly broken, it carried steady. Your daughter saved me, Chief. Not just from those men, but from myself. I've thought of nothing but her since. If she asks me, I will stand with her. I will be whatever she needs me to be." The chief's stern features softened, a rare smile flickering across his lips. Around them the compound held its breath, balanced on the fragile edge of transformation. In that moment, blood, pain, law, and history seemed to fall away, leaving only the promise of two hearts daring to heal centuries of division. The ceremonial pipe gleamed in the morning light, its red stone glowing like captured fire. Iron Bear lifted it higher, his voice resonant with authority. "Then let it be known. I offer my daughter, Ayana, to the soldier who chose honor over hatred. Let love bind what war has broken." The words echoed like a blessing, like healing rain over scorched earth. And as Thomas leaned against the post, trembling yet unbroken, he felt his soul awaken to a truth he had never known before, that love, pure and unyielding, was worth every lash, every scar, every sacrifice. The moment had come when pain gave way to promise, and promise unfolded into destiny. Thomas hung from the post as though the world itself had bound him there, his body a map of scars and fire, his breath ragged but alive. The chief's words lingered in the air like smoke from sacred flame, curling into every ear, seeping into every heart. "I offer my daughter." That single sentence had torn open the boundaries of his life, laying bare two paths that could never converge again. On one side, the weight of uniform, regulation, the unyielding chains of military duty that had shaped him since youth. On the other, the uncharted expanse of love, dangerous yet luminous. Ayana's eyes, waiting in the shadows of his memory, filled with trust he had not deserved yet desperately wished to honor. The compound seemed to lean forward with him, caught in the balance of his decision. Soldiers shifted on their feet, their discipline frayed by the enormity of the moment. Even Colonel Harrison's stoicism cracked, his features shadowed with the war inside him. He had lived his whole life by the book, yet now even he seemed to feel that the book had no chapter for this. Thomas closed his eyes, and in the darkness behind them he saw not the barracks, not the cold grey walls of discipline, but Ayana kneeling on rough earth 3 nights ago, pressing cloth to his bleeding brow. He felt her trembling hand steady despite fear, her whispered words like a lullaby, even though he could not understand them. That moment had branded itself deeper than any lash. It was not the soldier's life that had kept him upright these last hours. It was her gentleness, her courage, her faith in a stranger. She had been healing him even as he bled, and without her memory, he would have already collapsed into nothingness. He opened his eyes again, and though the world wavered in haze, his voice carried with surprising clarity. "If I choose her, I lose everything I have ever known. My uniform, my name, my country will cast me out." The words were raw, spoken more to himself than anyone else, but they trembled across the air. His throat burned, but he forced the truth to rise. "And yet, if I walk away, I will lose something far greater, the only thing that has ever made me feel whole." Iron Bear studied him, eyes deep and unwavering. "My daughter sees not with fear, but with truth. She already chose you in her heart. Now you must choose whether your heart is strong enough to answer hers." The soldier's silence pressed closer. a sea of gazes watching a man wrestle with his soul. The colonel's jaw was rigid, but his eyes betrayed the faintest ache, as though some forgotten part of himself envied the choice laid before Thomas. The sun arced higher, its warmth spilling like balm over bloodied skin, and Thomas felt its healing kiss. For the first time since the lashes began, he did not feel broken. He felt alive. He thought of Ayana again, not as the frightened girl in danger, but as the woman who had carved beauty bead by bead, who had prayed while threading colours into a necklace, who had whispered his name into her father's ear, though she had barely known it. That was no mere dreamer's fancy. That was love. Tender, fierce, unexplainable, yet undeniable. He turned his face toward Iron Bear, his voice hoarse but resolute. "Tell her I choose her. Tell her I choose love. Whatever the cost, whatever the loss, she is worth more than all of it." The chief's eyes gleamed, a rare softness breaking the granite of his face. In that instant, the compound itself seemed to exhale. A ripple spread through the soldiers, not approval, not rebellion, but awe, as though they had just witnessed something sacred rise from dust and pain. Colonel Harrison stepped forward, his voice low, edged with reluctant respect. "Private Brennan, if you accept this, you understand. You are no longer mine to command. You will leave this post, this army, everything." Thomas met his commander's gaze with clarity that shone even through exhaustion. "Sir, I left all of that behind the moment I stood between her and harm. This choice only makes it true." Harrison's face tightened, the weight of his position pressing upon him, but beneath the steel of command flickered the faintest glimmer of admiration, maybe even envy. For the colonel had followed duty all his life, and here was a soldier choosing something far braver, the freedom of his own heart. Iron Bear stepped closer, lifting the ceremonial pipe so the light caught the red stone, glowing like captured flame. "Then let us seal what your heart has spoken. When the sun sets, you will not stand alone as soldier or stranger. You will stand as husband, as son, as bridge between two peoples." Thomas closed his eyes, tears mingling with sweat and blood, but this time they flowed not from pain, but from relief. His wounds throbbed with fire, but the fire no longer consumed him. It cleansed. Healing surged in his chest, the kind of healing no salve could grant, only love. The compound watched as the battered soldier, broken in body but unshaken in spirit, gave his answer not with grand speeches, but with the unyielding truth of his choice. Love over duty, heart over habit, Ayana over everything. And as the day stretched toward evening, the shadows lengthened across the earth, carrying with them a promise that the next breath, the next heartbeat, would not be the end of his suffering, but the beginning of his destiny. The pain had been endured, the decision made, and now the world itself seemed to pause, waiting for the sacred ceremony that would transform punishment into promise, and promise into a life forever bound to love. The sun dipped low, washing the compound in a glow of amber and rose, as if the heavens themselves prepared to witness what had never been done before. Soldiers who had been trained to fear silence now stood in a hush more reverent than any church pews, while Iron Bear, steady as a mountain, unwrapped the ceremonial pipe with the care of a father unbinding his own heart. The red stone gleamed as if lit from within, its carved patterns alive with memory, carrying the voices of generations who had smoked it for treaties, blessings, and vows. Now, for the first time, it would bind a white soldier to a Lakota woman, and with that union attempt to stitch together two worlds that had known only blood. Thomas was cut down from the whipping post, his body collapsing into Ayana's waiting arms before the soldiers could move to catch him. She had arrived like a vision, her dress of soft buckskin embroidered with beadwork that shimmered in the dying light, her long dark braids heavy with blue and white beads that sang softly with every step. Her eyes, deep and luminous, found his with a tenderness that erased all the agony carved across his back. When her hands touched him, trembling yet sure, he felt healing radiate through his wounds, love pouring into him stronger than medicine, stronger than command, stronger even than pain. The soldiers watched as Iron Bear stepped into the circle forming at the center of the compound, holding the pipe aloft. His voice rose, solemn and strong, carrying the cadence of ritual. This pipe has blessed the marriages of 7 generations of my family. Today it will bless something new, a union that bridges 2 worlds, a vow stronger than war, stronger than hatred, stronger than fear. The warriors who had accompanied him began a low song, their voices weaving like wind across the prairie, steady, timeless, carrying sorrow and hope in equal measure. Ayana knelt beside Thomas, her hand resting over his heart. From her pouch she drew the necklace she had made, the carved bird now strung with beads that glowed like captured sky, each stitch a prayer, each bead a heartbeat. She lifted it high, speaking with careful English that trembled but did not falter. Among my people, when a woman gives her heart, she gives also her hand's labor. Every bead is my thought of him, every thread my prayer for his life. I place this upon him now, for he is my chosen one. With trembling fingers, she slipped the necklace over his neck, the bird resting against his chest. Thomas touched it with reverence, his tears mingling with blood, his voice hoarse, yet resolute. Ayana, you have been in every breath I've taken since that night. I came here a soldier, but your love has made me a man. Iron Bear extended the pipe to Thomas first. Supported by Ayana's gentle strength, Thomas lifted it with hands still shaking from lash and blood loss. He pressed the sacred stem to his lips and drew in the smoke, letting it swirl inside him like a breath from the spirits themselves. As it left him, he felt the burden of chains fall away, no longer bound to law, but to love. He passed the pipe to Ayana, who inhaled deeply, her eyes glistening as she joined him in the vow. Together their breaths rose in tendrils of smoke, twining upward into the evening sky, carrying their promise to the heavens. Iron Bear's voice declared for all to hear, "Let it be known, this soldier is no longer enemy, but son. He is bound to my daughter, bound to my people, bound to peace. What has been broken may yet be healed, and what was born of suffering will now be reborn in love." A murmur rippled through the soldiers, awe softening their rigid discipline. They had been trained to see the Lakota as savages, yet before them stood a ceremony of dignity, of sacred weight, of a love so luminous it defied hatred itself. Even Colonel Harrison, stone-faced as command demanded, felt the truth of what unfolded. His eyes betrayed the quiet ache of a man who knew he was witnessing something greater than war or duty, something that could never be undone. Ayana helped Thomas rise to his feet, her small frame bracing his broken body with surprising strength. As he stood, unsteady yet unbowed, he felt the earth shift beneath him, as though destiny itself had altered course. The warriors sang louder now, the song swelling like a river breaking through ice, and the women who had come with Ayana raised their voices in harmony, the melody twining around the fading light. It was a song of healing, of union, of a love powerful enough to draw two peoples closer than centuries of hatred had allowed. The smoke drifted into the sky, silver against the deepening twilight, and Thomas felt himself reborn in its rising trail. No longer Private Brennan, the soldier bound by orders and lashes, he was now Wasson Hin Waste, good intention, husband of Ayana, son of Iron Bear, a bridge between worlds. His scars burned, but not with agony. They burned with meaning, carved not as punishment, but as testament. Ayana pressed her forehead to his, her whisper carrying only for him, yet her words echoed through his soul. We are one now. Your pain is mine, my hope is yours. Together we will heal. He closed his eyes, breathing her in, feeling life settle into him where moments ago only despair had lived. The soldiers broke their silence, some cheering softly, others murmuring, as if awed by holiness they did not understand. The Lakota warriors' voices soared, their song lifting high into the night, declaring to the stars that love had triumphed over hatred. Even Colonel Harrison, though bound by duty, did not move to end what had been sanctified before his eyes. Instead, he lowered his gaze, humbled by the sight of a soldier who had chosen love over law and found in that choice a strength no army could ever command. As night fell, torches lit the compound in flickering gold, their light dancing across faces filled with wonder. Thomas, supported by Ayana's embrace, felt every scar as though it were a vow carved into his flesh. The necklace rested warm against his chest, the carved bird whispering of freedom, of destiny, of love unbreakable. The world had changed in that sacred circle, and as the stars emerged above, it seemed even the heavens bowed to witness a healing that no war could destroy. And so, from the ashes of pain, they stood, husband and wife, bound not by chains, but by love that had chosen to endure. The sacred pipe still glowed faintly in Iron Bear's hands, a torch of hope passed from one world into another, carrying with it the promise that love, once kindled, could burn brighter than hatred, strong enough to guide even the darkest night into dawn. 3 months passed, and the world that once seemed carved in iron and pain now unfolded in rhythms soft and healing, like the steady flow of a river carrying away all harshness. The Lakota camp stretched along the banks of the Powder River, its circle of lodges breathing with life, laughter, and the quiet hum of tradition. Smoke from cooking fires spiraled gently into the crisp autumn sky, mingling with the cries of children chasing one another between teepees and the low songs of women pounding maize. For Thomas, who now bore the name Wasson Hin Waste, good intention, every dawn felt like waking into a life he had never dared to imagine, one woven not of orders and drills, but of love, belonging, and the tender weight of new beginnings. He sat cross-legged outside the lodge he shared with Ayana, clumsy fingers working the beadwork she patiently taught him. Each tiny stitch was a meditation, each bead strung a prayer, not only for the scars that still marked his back, but for the fragile hope that had taken root between two worlds. The wounds had long closed into raised lines, pale against his skin, yet they remained as living testimony of what he had chosen, and why. Where once he bore them with bitterness, now he carried them as vows carved into flesh, reminders of love stronger than pain, of courage greater than fear. Ayana emerged from the lodge with movements softened by care, her steps deliberate, her hands carrying a bundle wrapped in deerskin. The afternoon sun painted her hair with fire, and when she knelt beside him, he saw again the quiet radiance that had first held him upright on the whipping post. Her eyes shone with something new now, a secret joy that she had shared with him weeks ago, the gentle curve of her belly beneath her dress, the quiet miracle growing between them. Thomas's breath always caught when he saw it, as though his heart could not comprehend the depth of what life had given him. Not only her love, but the promise of their child, a thread of both their worlds woven into a single heartbeat. From the bundle she unwrapped tiny moccasins, each no larger than her palm, stitched with the same blue and white beads that adorned the necklace he still wore daily. "Our child will need strong feet for the journey ahead," she said softly, her voice weaving Lakota words into English, a blend of worlds as natural as the wind. He reached out, rough hands trembling as he touched the delicate shoes, marveling at the precision of her craft and the tenderness stitched into every line. The camp lived around them in harmony, and though Thomas still stumbled in the language, laughter greeted his efforts, patience guided his mistakes. The children followed him with wide-eyed curiosity, eager to hear his broken attempts at their words, his stories of rivers and cities they had never seen. The women taught Ayana songs for expectant mothers, their voices rising with wisdom carried through countless generations. The warriors who had once looked at him with suspicion now nodded with quiet respect, for he had endured their tests not by strength alone, but by humility and heart. Slowly he became not guest nor captive, but family, and yet the world beyond the camp did not forget him. One afternoon, the sound of hooves carried a figure familiar yet changed by time and burden. Colonel Harrison, riding with no escort but the weight of his conscience. He dismounted with care, his weathered face shadowed by months of struggle against forces greater than his command. He greeted Iron Bear with the measured respect of men who had once faced one another across the barrel of a gun, and together they walked toward Thomas and Ayana. "Thomas," the colonel said, his tone clipped but heavy with sincerity, "there are developments that affect you." His gaze flickered toward Ayana's rounded belly, and for a moment his iron discipline faltered, humanity pressing through. He spoke of reports from Washington, of a federal investigator questioning the marriage, of whispers that Thomas should be declared deserter, that his union with Ayana be struck invalid under the law. Ayana's hand tightened on Thomas's arm as Harrison's words uncoiled like snakes, cold and venomous. The colonel's jaw clenched. "Some officials demand your return. If not willingly, then bounty hunters may be sent. The charge is desertion in time of war." Iron Bear's eyes darkened, his voice like distant thunder. "And what of my daughter? What of the child she carries? Are they spoils of your justice, or shadows to be erased?" The colonel faltered, the burden of law warring with the decency he had glimpsed on that fateful day in the fort. "I don't know," he admitted, and the words carried more weight than any command he had ever given. Silence swept the camp, thick with fear and defiance, but Ayana's voice, gentle yet unwavering, cut through it. They fear love because it proves hatred is not the only path. They would tear my husband from me to silence what we are." Her hand rested over her belly, her eyes fierce though tears shimmered within them. Thomas felt fire surge in his chest, the same fierce love that had driven him to strike down Murphy, to endure the lashes, to choose Ayana above all else. He reached for her hand, his scars burning with the reminder of what he had already sacrificed. "They may strip me of my name, my country, even my life," he whispered, his voice steady despite the storm within. "But they cannot take from me what we have made here. They cannot take our child, our love, our family." Around them, members of the tribe gathered, warriors, women, children, closing in a circle of solidarity. Their presence was a shield, not of weapons alone, but of belonging. The children tugged at Thomas's hands, laughing as if to banish the darkness, while elders sang softly, weaving healing into the gathering dusk. The camp itself seemed to breathe with one voice. Whatever came, they would face it together. Colonel Harrison looked at the circle forming, at the soldier he had once punished, now standing unbroken with a people who had claimed him as their own. Something shifted in his eyes, the brittle authority softening into weary respect. "I won't let them take this from you," he said at last, his voice quiet but resolute. "I have seen too much to deny it. Your marriage is real, your choice is true, and no law written in Washington can erase that." Relief washed over Thomas like cool rain. Ayana leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder, and in that moment he felt the future steady itself, fragile yet luminous. The carved bird at his chest seemed to glow with the last light of the setting sun, a symbol of what they had endured, of what they had chosen, of what they would fight to protect. As night fell, the campfire lit their faces in amber glow. Thomas held Ayana close, his hand resting on her growing belly, and around them the tribe sang songs of welcome and strength. The sound rose into the starry sky like a promise that whatever storms might come, love would endure, healing would continue, and the family they had created together would stand unshaken. And as he gazed into the fire, Thomas understood with perfect clarity. He was no longer a soldier of the army, but a man of two worlds, bound not by command, but by love, by honor, by the healing power of belonging. And with Ayana's hand in his, and their child stirring beneath her heart, he knew that whatever battles lay ahead, they would face them side by side, hearts bound forever in the light they had chosen. Winter came with its long breath of ice, folding the valley in white silence. Yet within the Lakota camp, the fire of life burned strong. Smoke curled from every teepee, laughter of children echoed over snowdrifts, and the steady heartbeat of drums reminded all that the people endured as they always had. For Thomas, each dawn was a miracle. He woke beside Ayana, her warmth pressed to him beneath thick furs, her dark hair spilling across his chest like midnight silk. He traced gentle circles over her swelling belly, marveling at the life that stirred within, each movement of their child, a reminder that love had carved a place for itself where once only hatred had ruled. The scars on his back still throbbed when the cold deepened, but Ayana's hands soothed them, rubbing oils into the skin with tenderness that healed more than flesh. Every touch was a vow, every glance a hymn of belonging. She whispered songs to their unborn child, words woven with the healing power of generations. And Thomas found himself learning them, repeating the syllables until his tongue caught their rhythm. Each word felt like a key unlocking a deeper chamber of his heart, guiding him further away from the soldier he had once been, anchoring him firmly as husband, father, son of two worlds. But the outside world did not sleep. Word reached them of bounty hunters riding under orders, men who saw profit in chains and blood. Riders had been spotted near the Powder River, and the wind carried rumors of broken treaties, of soldiers marching. Fear might have shattered lesser hearts, but in the circle of family Thomas and Ayanna had built, courage blossomed. Iron Bear gathered his people, his voice steady as the winter stars. We do not live in fear, we live in truth. This man has chosen us, and we have chosen him. Whoever comes to tear him away must face not a deserter, but a family bound in love. When bounty hunters finally approached, the camp did not meet them with violence, but with dignity. Warriors stood tall, women and children behind them, Ayanna at Thomas's side with her hand over her belly. Thomas felt the old reflexes of soldiers' fear, but Ayanna's touch steadied him, her eyes reminding him that strength was not always drawn from weapons, but from love unyielding. The hunters, hardened by greed, saw in that moment not weakness, but a wall stronger than stone. The chief's authority, the tribe's unity, and the quiet fire in Thomas's eyes broke something in them. They left without spilling blood, muttering curses swallowed by the snow, but their retreat carried a truth. The power of family was greater than the power of fear. As spring broke the winter's hold, Ayanna gave birth in their lodge, her cries rising with the rhythm of ancient songs sung by women around her. Thomas held her hand, whispering every prayer he knew, and when the child came, tiny, fierce, wailing into the world, the camp erupted in celebration. Iron Bear lifted his grandchild high, the firelight painting the baby in gold, and declared a name that meant born of two rivers, for the child carried both heritages, both loves, both struggles within her. Thomas wept openly, cradling his daughter as Ayanna smiled through exhaustion, her eyes shining brighter than the stars. Days bled into months, and life unfolded in gentle patterns. Thomas hunted with the warriors, learned the ways of the bow, and returned each evening to find Ayanna teaching their child songs of both tongues. He marveled at how seamlessly love stitched two worlds together, how healing could bloom even where hatred once reigned. Yet always the shadow of outside forces lingered. Letters carried news of politicians debating their marriage, commanders branding his name with betrayal. But here, in the warmth of the fire, with his child asleep against his chest, Thomas knew those words were powerless. Love had already written a truth stronger than ink. Years later, as their daughter grew, she played at the edge of the river with other children, her laughter carrying into the wind. Thomas and Ayanna watched together, their fingers interlaced. "Do you ever regret?" she asked softly. He turned to her, eyes full of the same wonder that had seized him the first time he had seen her face in the shadows of that fort. "Never. If every lash, every wound, every exile was the price, I would pay it again and again, because it brought me to you, because it gave us her." She leaned against him, her cheek resting over his heart, and he felt peace as deep as the river flowing beside them. The world beyond their valley never ceased its noise, but within their circle love reigned. The carved bird still hung at Thomas's chest, the necklace Ayana had made shimmering with the same blue and white beads. It was no longer just a token. It was a living testament that love could triumph against all odds. The scars on his back, the threats from outside, the laws written to erase them, none of it mattered in the face of what they had built together. And so their story lived not only in the whispers of the campfires, but in the hearts of all who saw them. A soldier who chose love over duty, a Lakota woman who gave her heart without fear, a family that became a bridge between two worlds. Their love was not perfect, not without struggle, but it endured, and in enduring, it healed. If this story has touched you, if it has stirred even a spark of hope or warmth in your heart, let that healing linger. Share your thoughts. Let your voice join this circle and keep the flame alive. Like, comment, and subscribe to carry their story forward. Because when we choose love over fear, we are all writing chapters that heal the world.